Good day, everyone. My name is Jibril Abubakar, aka the Golden Voice of GSU. Today, I'm going to be, talking on the Ottoman Empire, which I have started in the previous edition. So this one is just a continuation from where I stopped. I stopped at the Reformation activities forwarded by the Sultan, the Ottoman Sultan, called Sultan Salim III. Don't forget, in the previous class, I tried to explain to you what the Ottoman Empire experienced. It was actually an European exertion of influence and power with the aim of dominating the entire Ottoman Empire, taking control of their both human and material resources for their own selfish gain, particularly Russia and Austria. So in an effort to stop or to combat against this European penetration and influence, the Ottoman Empire began to make their way in reforming the state institution, particularly military institutions and their educational institutions, in order to fight against the Europeans and their influence, so as to revive their hitherto glory in the history of the world. So Sultan Salim III, he introduced quite a number of policies and reforms, which let me just say them as brief as possible in order to recap it at least for easy understanding. He introduced reforms by rebuilding barracks, increasing the salaries of the Janissaries, which is the strong military institution that is already weakening as a result of their adventuring into a business and commercial activities with the craftsmen, with the civilians of the Ottoman Empire. Again, I said he established an embassy in Europe where there are, an educated Ottoman Empire citizens called the Dragomas in Greeks. Those people, they are familiar in understanding, so many languages. Those Dragomas, they speak quite a number of European languages, particularly English, French, Portuguese, among others. So this diplomatic relationship helped in strengthening, their relativity that is between Ottoman Empire and the Europeans. But ironically, while this development is going on, Sultan Salim failed in one way or the other, because in the forms or process of his reforms, he bypassed the Janissaries and established a new infantry corps called Nizam al-Jadid. This one is another military institution that Salim III established, which replaced the already weakening Janissary institution of Ottoman Empire. Understand this point. While the Janissaries have involved themselves in the commercial activities in order to establish a luxurious lifestyle and accumulate unprecedented wealth. So they don't want the steps taken by Salim III, as it will affect their own interest of accumulating the wealth of the Ottoman Empire. Therefore, with the weakening of the Ottoman Empire, it is viewed by the Janissary militaries as just an opportunity for them to accumulate wealth at the expense of the Ottoman Empire, the central government that is collapsing. So Salim, as I said in the previous class, he is not a modernist, he is a traditionalist, conservative. because while he's introducing a new reforms and policies to revive the empire, he is at the same time conscious of the long-standing Islamic order tradition. So he introduced a new military institution called Nizam al-Jadid. There were numbered 23,000 soldiers. So as a result of this, the Janissaries did not cooperate themselves with the administration of Salim III. So Salim failed to mobilize those Nizam al-Jadid in fighting against the Janissaries, who are also their adversaries or their enemies. Because in this development, the Janissaries military institutions, who are selfish in this context, they are also the same thing as the Europeans. Therefore, they become enemies to the administration of Ottoman Empire because they subscribe to the idea of appropriating the wealth through corruption and nepotism to become wealthy, allowing the central government of the Ottoman Empire to collapse. So, Janissaries, coupled with other interest groups of the empire, that is the bureaucrats, the ulama, the derebis, they unite and they connive with each other, and they eventually succeeded in deposing Salim III and eventually assassinated him and imposed or replaced him with another sultan called Muhammad I. So Muhammad I replaced Salim III, who was being deposed and assassinated by the Janissaries. So Muhammad the first assured the Janissaries their selfish interests. Therefore, he assured them that he will allow them to continue appropriating the wealth of the Ottoman Empire while he is, a leader. So, but there is one weakness associated with the administration of Muhammad I, and one of which is central in the development of any country. That weakness is he lacks leadership, ideas, and tactics. He is not educated enough to rule the administration as well as to revive the entire Ottoman Empire, let alone to fight against the European influence who are aiming to dominate the Ottoman Empire. So while this is going on, while this reformation process is going on by the Ottoman Sultan, which I said in the process, there is a faction, the leaders, the elites of Ottoman Empire, in the process of reforming the empire, they were divided into two factions, as I said earlier on. If you are very careful, we have the modernists and the conservatives. That is the continuity and the traditionalists. The continuity, progressive, in other words, they call them continuity, or you call them progressive, or you call them modernities. Those ones are on the idea of moving geared towards the ideologies, way of thinking, manners, philosophies of the Europeans. While the traditionalists and the conservatives subscribe to the idea of reforming the existing state institutions that are already declining, but in the process still conscious of the long-standing Islamic order of the empire. So there are two different people. The Europeans are, on the other hand, instigating deliberately a war with the Ottoman Empire. having seen the weakness, the internal problems and disunity that was going on between the Ottoman Empire and it, the Europeans continue in instigating a war and they begin to take over as many as possible territories of the Ottoman Empire, rendering more weakness to the empire, paralyzing the empire. Therefore, the Europeans here are the external factors that affect the Ottoman Empire, leading to their collapse, while the Reformation movement and the internal crisis are the internal problem revealing the Ottoman Empire. So the two problems coupled together, compounded together, led to the final collapse of the Ottoman Empire in 20th century. You understand this development. So Ottoman Empire, that is what is going on. So while this was going on, Egypt, on the other hand, was another important province of the Ottoman Empire, which is endowed with natural resources, and the Europeans are moving towards taking control of the Egypt in order to take control of the resources. Mind you, this movement of the Europeans was made possible as a result of the Industrial Revolution that took place in Europe. Because when the Industrial Revolution developed in Europe, that is the entire European countries, Britain, France, Germany, Russia, Italy, Portugal, among others, Sweden, Spain, they experienced Industrial Revolution and they began to search for a place to source for more raw materials, more markets to sell their products, and more place to reinvest the products, the subsidies of what they have produced so far. So with this Industrial Revolution, they take control part of Egypt from the Ottoman Empire. They designated some areas in the Ottoman Empire to be a chief producer and exporter of cash crops. For example, they designated Egypt to be a chief producer and exporter of cotton. They moved forward and designated Syria and some parts of Lebanon to be a chief producer and exporter of cereal crops like spices and silk, etc. So thereafter, just to cover it up or to sum it up, they incorporated Egypt and the Ottoman Empire itself into a global capitalist economic market, where Ottoman Empire has eventually turns out to be a dumping ground of the Europeans' byproduct, just like in Africa today. As a result of colonialism, Africa has become a dumping ground of the Europeans' products. That is why in Nigeria you see we have okrika cloth, which we Hausa we call gonjo. These are products used by the advanced countries and they move it down to us. Why? Because they destroyed all the manufacturing industries, particularly textile industries, manufacturing industries, in order to pave a way for them to be bringing in their product and sell it to us while they have used it and get tired with it. So that is the same case with the Ottoman Empire. So Ottoman Empire became a dumping ground and they began to look inward to the Europeans, obtaining loans which they could not pay back. So Ottoman Empire is getting more down and down at the expense of the Europeans. The Europeans are progressing while the Ottoman Empire is going back and going back and going back. That is one ironical and paradoxical, development that is going on from 18th to 19th century in Ottoman Empire. This led the Ottoman Empire to call for somebody called Muhammad Ali of Egypt to come in assistance of the Ottoman Empire in order to reform those institutions to fight against the Europeans. This development it was very critical. He experienced a traumatic. So at this juncture, due to the time constraint, I'm going to stop at this very point. Then you will follow me to the subsequent class, which I'm going to complete the history of Ottoman Empire as brief as possible. That is to say, I'm going to start with the activities of Napoleon Bonaparte and their influence in the Ottoman Empire, as well as a brief activities of Muhammad Ali of Egypt. Thank you very much. Continue to subscribe and share, like the campus tutorial team. Thank you for understanding and watching.